The following is a conversation with Clara Youngblood. She runs a agency called Youngblood, and they specialize in branding, UX, and UI design.
Hi guys, I'm Clara, and if you want to find out what a really good mission is, then tune in.
She's a creative mind that strives for passion and perseverance. We talked to her about the statement of starting with the why it's so important to begin your project with a mission, what the mission statement needs to be, how you can develop your company from that point on. It's a really fascinating conversation. I'm sure there's a lot you'll be able to get out of it.
What I actually do is I help especially startups, but also other companies to build their brand. And I help them with branding, UI and UX design. So I do everything in design and mission telling, in branding, from website design to software design.
As always, the podcast is brought to you by CodeSphere. To find out more about CodeSphere, simply log on to codesphere.com. And there'll be a new episode next week, so like and subscribe everywhere you get your podcasts. Enjoy the episode.
Have you spent, am I right to say you spent some time in London?
Yes, not in London directly, but when I was 15, I went to school in Canterbury, but just...
you can hear it, yeah. Not quite London.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I spent a lot of time in London because I have a twin sister. She was in Ipswich, and we always met in London. So that was very cool. But yeah, I love traveling and I love learning new languages and also learning the language actually in a different part. So I love that I could actually improve my English a lot there.
You've got a very good English accent as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, you have very good English. A lot. Yeah. That's the word that picked it out for me. Someone says a lot.
Canterbury as well. I think if we'd tried, I would have stabbed at Canterbury, home counties anyway, for sure.
So your business is called Youngblood.
Yes, exactly. Like Youngblood, Youngblood is on the one hand a persona and a theme, or a character, you could even say. It is something I really identify with, and I also want my customers to see themselves a bit in that. It is a very open-minded person, a Youngblood. It is fearless, it is independent, and not afraid to take actions, actually. So that's what I love about the theme of a Youngblood. It's kind of a badass, actually. And that's what I really love about that. But it's also like my surname in German, like Jungblut. And the third part is that it's
Starker family now.
And the third one is that it's my brand, actually, like my design studio now. Because I try to build my brand around that theme and around that name. Exactly.
Very cool. And you mainly work with startups or small businesses or products, or what's your kind of client base?
Yeah, it started with startups actually, and I think it's still my main company theme, because startups often need help with one hand their mission and their branding as well, because it's all about innovation and finding the user. Or not just finding the user, but finding out what the user wants and who the user is. And I can help them a lot with that also because I have a psychological background. So for me, it is very easy to understand people in empathy and stuff like that. So that's why I love to work with startups and working with them, as it's a very fast growing company also and very open-minded environment. So that's why I mainly work with startups, but it's also individual people, coaches, something like that, where I can help with also branding and websites and stuff like that. But then it's mostly, not about the product.
It's interesting that you define it as an invasion. That's great. I haven't ever heard anyone put startups a modus operandi into that kind of turn of phrase before. That's great.
Innovation, I'm pretty sure was the word.
Did you say innovation, or it's like an invasion?
No, innovation. No.
It still makes sense though. That's why I thought you said it. It's because that's
really
such a startup mentality of we want to invade this market, and we want to get the biggest market share as fast as possible.
No, that's true, because it's always a niche also. Yeah.
So you mentioned there that you help them with UX UI in an early stage with startups. So why is that so important for early stage startups?
So for early stages, it is absolutely crucial, because startups, as I said, are built on innovation. That means often you first need to understand the user, and this is the UX. Like, you need to understand the needs and what the user actually wants and what its problem is. Otherwise, you can't build anything. Like, mostly you have an idea in your head, right? Startups start often with an idea, but that's not the reason, or that shouldn't be how they should go, because they first need to understand the user and build a valuable product based on their needs, and not the other way around. So that's why UI and UX is really, really important, like especially in early phase, because you need to bring value and to show people why they should actually buy that, and to gain customers and stuff like that.
That's quite an interesting kind of way of approaching it, because I think it must be quite difficult as a startup, like founder or CEO or someone who's like, is it that they start with an idea? Because if I was just going to carry on with that analogy, I'd be like, I've had this brilliant idea to invent this thing. It must be rarer for someone to be like, I can see this perfect demographic for something. It must be so hard to kind of like fit an idea into that. Or do you often work with people who have this idea and you're like, well, it's a great idea, but no one's going to, is that like a difficult part of the work for you?
Well, like mostly people obviously start with an idea. That's always how things are created, right? But in the end, like in the whole process, the product itself mainly has nothing to do with the idea anymore, because like you start with an idea and then you look, okay, who is my target audience? And then you start with user interviews, finding out who the user is, what he needs. And then you iterate so much, and mostly then the idea, the early stage idea, has nothing to do with the product anymore, because you found out who the user is and what he wanted. So it's a process always, but ideas are always starting points, and that's the great thing about it. But you can't like stick to the idea and just stick to it. You always have to find out what people actually want, and that's when the idea changes.
So this whole concept of like flexibility as a founder, and like
exactly, like you always need to be open-minded.
Yeah,
especially like in a startup environment.
We were talking to somebody last week, and they were saying that one of the key factors for spotting successful teams who work at startups is the people who are willing to listen. So I guess that's something that you must find as well, right? So the people who are like, I've got this great idea, and you're like, well, it's good, but here's an improvement on it. Like, being able to take that feedback must be quite a good trait.
Yeah, exactly. Like also when like talking then actually to people, it is so important that you try not to talk. Like you should always have the user or the customer talk. You should like ask very inspiring questions and get people to talk, because you don't want to talk because you know already what's in your head. You want to know what the other people says, and then be open to change and build the innovation based on that. So it's always good to listen and like have empathy and try to understand. This is like the crucial thing always.
Yeah, it's hard not to ask leading questions as well. It's a real skill you have to learn. I actually used your blueprint templates for user interviews beforehand. Good. Obviously, I adjusted them quite heavily, but they were really my structure of like, okay, don't ask leading questions. Make sure I try it, but at the same time, you can't be too robotic if you, especially in like the context of a user interview. It's
exactly, like you have to really have empathy and try to train that. Try to think, okay, how is the other person feeling? Like help them in feeling comfortable and trying to get them into a place where they really like to talk and talk about situations. And that's also what's the very important part, that you try to not ask, on the one hand, too generic questions, because you always want to have anecdotes where people like tell stories, and then it's very easy for them because they have something in their head. Like talking about generic stuff is mostly very hard for people because they don't really know what to say then, and then they don't get in the flow. So that's why also like in my interview guideline, I try to also push more into that direction, that you have a guideline, which is always super, super important, in a structure, but then really make it about the person in front of you and try to ask the questions based on the person you have in front of you. And like a blueprint isn't good, because then it's robotic. Then you have just questions and it's not about the user or the person in front of you anymore. So that's very important.
Before we move on from like the user interview process, I found that like finding like 1 or 2 minutes at the start to talk about something other than the interview made so much difference. Just some human connection about not even something above the weather, but like, you know, not super personal about the person, but any kind of conversation before we begin really changed the tone
100%.
of how people speak. Yeah.
Because it's so important that you click like with the person, because otherwise the person won't be comfortable. And this is like the whole foundation of a good talk, right? Like to click and to bond with people, because then actually it's fun to talk, and that people will open up. Otherwise, people won't open up and won't answer your questions that you really want to hear. So very important.
You should start a podcast. This is pretty much exact. I was listening and I was thinking that's the kind of stuff that we should do.
Well, it's also important, like to you want people to give you like honest negative feedback. People are always like tend towards positivity when you give them questions like, hey, here's my first idea, what do you think as a user? They're always like, oh yeah, it's a great idea, love it. They don't want to say like, I hate this because of X, Y, and Z, you know? So I always try and like distance myself from the question as much as I can to try and make them say like, no, I don't like that. Or sometimes I'll just say out loud, be negative, you know, there's no wrong answer, don't worry. And then...
Yes, this is like such an important thing also, to take away the fear of saying something wrong, because like I had so many user interviews where people were really afraid to give negative feedback because obviously they don't want to hurt your feelings, but actually you need the negative things in user interviews because you want to improve, right? And you can't improve with just hearing the good stuff. Like you want to hear the negative stuff. So this is also something really important in such interviews or with talking people in general. When you want to improve, like take the fear away of negative, like being afraid to tell negative stuff, because that's the one thing you really need to hustle, like and build something great out of the negative stuff.
Yeah, founders hire a third person to do these interviews because it's too personal, too close to you.
Yes, sure. And also like finding a person that is really like open and, you know, laughs also with the people and, you know, have directly that connection. This is so important with finding good user interviewees also there, because otherwise you can't like get out like the things out of people that you really want to hear. Exactly.
And so as you've started that research, you've sort of started a project, you've started the research, you're kind of you're digging into it. How does that all that information then sort of like find its way into your UI creation and like design process as a whole? Do you have like a set way of like, I take this information and I digest it, or is it just like a bit more flowing project to project?
No, it is flowing. Like obviously I have different stages, like also with customers, when I just do the foundation, like the branding and the logo, this is obviously something else. But when I also do the UX and the UI, like the product, then the UX in the first stage is super important. So I always try to do then user interviews myself, because I, as a designer, need to know 100% who my user is and understand like which problems does he have, which needs does he have, and then just build also the UI based on the needs. So many things flow into this. For example, also color psychology. This is such an important thing as well. And like also the whole creation, how rich the information should be, how easy should it be? Is there somebody that needs very easy language, or is there somebody that needs very, very high quality language? Like there are so many things based on the UX that flow into my UI, and also in the design process. Like understanding the user and the customer is like the most crucial thing. And I think that's also often a problem about designers that came, for example, just out of graphic design. Like UI UX is a kind of newer thing in design, and often when you're just 100% designer or artist or whatever, often the part really is missing with the psychology. So it's always about the user and not about the product. Like that's is really something people need to change in their head, because often like their minds are so controlled by the product and having a really nice product, letting it look really, really fancy. But this is not the thing. Like it's always about the user and what the user wants. So you should always have like user interviews and finding out who that is.
There's a good example of that actually is the company that I work for, that our sister company. They're a startup, and they build an app where you can find spare car parts for your used car, or for like car dealers use it essentially. And they said that was a massive problem that they ran into. They wanted to like basically drag these people who run garages and mechanics and stuff into the 21st century with a user interface that was like fitting. It's like kind of trying to say to them, this will make your lives easier than using like an old Windows style spreadsheet interface. And they're just like, well, is it going to be better for me or not?
Yeah. The automotive industry seems very like stuck in the past. That's a weird fact.
Yeah.
I know a few people have said that now.
I was reading an article yesterday actually, and they were saying that it's like a really interesting moment for automotive industries, because there were things that are stuck in the past are almost at the point now where they will always be in the past, because now cars are more software than they are hardware. Like, if your Tesla, for example, breaks down, it's more likely that a guy with a laptop will come out to fix it. Or like, for example, my brother. This is a very specific example. My brother-in-law is a farmer, and they recently bought a new tractor. And the guy that maintains it, they were like, we can't do anything with this tractor now because all of it is software. So the guy comes and plugs it in with like USB cable, and it's just like tap, 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 fixed your tire. Yeah. That's not what happens. But
this is actually such a sad thing, because I always wanted to learn how to fix old timers. I was always into that. And then I tried to go to a mechanical, some like people who fix broken cars, and they were like, no, like you need to be kind of a software engineer. And I was so sad, because I really wanted to do the other thing.
I want to do it for the overall only, like just that piece. I'd love that.
Yeah, but that's how it changes.
Yeah, exactly. So back onto the topic. So I really, this is the part of the interview that I was really excited about, because we were talking about this whole concept of starting with the why, and this whole idea of like a mission statement, and how startups kind of can define theirs and use it. So maybe if you could go into a little bit of detail on like what mission is, and then maybe explain. I kind of like very ham-fistedly explained it at the start. Maybe if you could explain what this whole starting with the why concept is, and how that kind of flows into this whole idea of branding and mission.
Exactly. Like on the first side, like branding overall, like the whole branding process, which involves the mission finding process, is like absolutely crucial, especially today. Like this is a thing that turns companies and products into a brand, like things people actually can identify with and people would love. Without a brand, like just a company, people don't love companies, people love brands, and everything around it, like everything they can think about of that, which is not the product, just like the whole vibe the company or the brand gives. Without a good branding, people won't know why they buy something. And this is when the why comes in, like the whole mission thing. Like, first of all, what is a mission? Like a mission is the purpose and the belief of a company. And this is very, very crucial, because that's what people actually identify with, not the product. It's never about the product, as I said already. It's about what the company or the brand does to change their status quo. And this is like through products, but that's what you need to communicate. So in general, the whole like start with why is about like communicating from the inside out. When we like reference like Simon Sinek for that, because that's what he built, he has the golden circle, which is the communication of the why. And there the why is in the center, and then comes the how, and then the what. And you first need to start communicating the mission, like the why, and then go to the like rational parts where you explain the whole product and stuff, so why they should buy it. This is based on like functional needs and stuff like that, on features and stuff like that. But the most important thing is always the why, because that's what people get inspired by.
So you mentioned there again, it's about like communicating that publicly, because I think a lot of startups are like, they'll even make like a mission statement, you know, okay, we want to fix this problem, and it's just implied there because we have the problem, that's why. But in publicly stating this and communicating this is like really important step. Okay.
Like this is something startups really have to learn, like communicating, not startups, every company, like really communicating the mission, and especially for startups, because like you have to imagine a startup, especially in the beginning phase, they don't have a finished product. It's just like a whole process. And then what can they sell? They can basically just sell the mission and the belief, because the product isn't finished yet. It's not a high, glossy, fancy thing. It is something they have to communicate, which really evolves the brand, and that they won't lose their customers. Because, like, of course, the product won't be the best one yet. It will be there soon. But right now, they can just sell the mission and thus creating a bond. And this is why mission and communicating the mission, especially in a startup sense, is like absolutely crucial. Otherwise, I think they will lose their customers on the one hand, and it will have it really, really hard to grow very fast. Because, yeah, as I said, the mission is the whole foundation of the brand, and communicating why people should buy it or why people should love it.
Is the mission and the why the same thing?
Basically, like, the mission is basically the why, the how, and the what together. But the why actually is the thing that drives behavior. When we go a bit into the brain, the why connects with our limbic system. So that's the emotional part. That's actually where, like, our whole decision making is made, where our intuition lays, but it doesn't like communicate with our speech. In a sense, like, our speech is connected to the rational part, the neocortex. So that's the newest part of the brain. That's where our whole ratio is. And that's why it's also very important to communicate the what and the how, because, like, people often have something feels right? And this comes from the why, because that's the emotional part. So they know what feels right and wrong, but they can't communicate why and what, because we don't, like, the limbic system doesn't connect to our speech. That's just with our rational part. And that's why we also communicate the what and the how, because then people can rationalize it and explain why they do what they do. Because on the one hand, it feels right. And on the other hand, they have the features and all of that. So they can explain why they bought something or why they lost something. So the whole package is the mission. And that's why you need to tell the why, the how, and the what. The only problem is that most startups don't communicate the why. And also many companies, and just the great companies really communicate the why. And that's why they have such a, like, strong bond with their customers.
Would you say that's a marketing copy job, or, I mean, is it a UX, UI design point? I mean, or is it both? Obviously, it's all a team effort, but I mean, where does this responsibility lie?
For the listeners who can't see Clara's face when Dan said, is it a marketing copy job? There was a look of, absolutely not.
No. For me...
No, it's good. It's a good question. That's good. Got a good emotional response.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah. There we have that thing. Like, it is a lot about inspiration and not especially like selling something to people. Like, marketing, I love marketing and everything, but often also sales is about selling stuff. And the mission is something that you shouldn't at all sell it. It is something that should come natural, that inspires people. So it is, I wouldn't say it is a job of a certain part of the company. It is maybe something every employee should be involved in, like, especially in the early phase, there aren't that many employees, right? But it is something that the company really, really needs to think about in the first place. So to think about, okay, what do they want to change? Like, what is their belief? What is their purpose? What do they want to help people with? Which status quo, like, do they want to change? And what is the end result? So it isn't, like, I wouldn't say a part of a designer, it isn't something a marketer should do, but, like, the whole team as such, because they should also know why they work at that company and why they actually work. Like, why do they want to solve that problem? And so I think rather it is not a specific job there. It is mainly a team finding a mission that also drives their behavior and where they can stick to. So I think there's not right or wrong. Probably also a marketer could do it. But I think also, like, especially the leading team and the founding team should know. I mean, they had an idea in the first place, so they should especially know what the mission is and finding out how to communicate that.
Yeah. I guess on the other end of the spectrum as well, it's interesting you say about, like, it being how it is sort of like tied to marketing, because if you think obviously startups, maybe it's one person, two people, but then you think on the other end of the spectrum, if I think of mission in like Facebook or Tesla or Google, or not Google so much, but maybe like Apple, you instantly think of the mission is so personified by their CEO and founder that it's like it's completely intangible. And then you think, maybe in the early days, those people were seen as like absolute, they're seen as these kind of leading lights in the industry.
Yeah.
And maybe Steve Jobs actually he just died. I can't say died at the right time. That's a very terrible turn of phrase, but just died just before he became a pariah. Yeah. Because I think that now it feels a little bit like the tide is turning against, the likes of Mark Zuckerberg, because it feels like marketing now. I listened to a podcast with him the other day, and it's just like, this guy, it's a mission. He's talking purely about a mission, but it sounds like marketing because he's convinced us so far that he's made us believe in a certain way. And I think Elon Musk is also starting down that path now, where people kind of see him as a bit of a more of a salesman than a mission person.
He's a classic example of a master marketer more than actually doing anything useful. The Boring Company, I didn't realize until someone pointed it out, it's just a subway system, but obviously he's just marketed it to us as like some new innovative thing, and it's like that's exactly what the subway is.
Yeah. But it's just such an interesting kind of topic with this whole mission thing, because again, that's why I kind of withdrew Google from my example there, because Google's mission as well as to be this information company and to give you access of information and give you everything at your fingertips. Their why is still super powerful, but because they pivoted slightly and had that parent group, Alphabet, and now their two founders have stepped away, it completely keeps the focus on the mission and the why, as opposed to allowing that personification and pollution down the line.
Their marketing is very much why. It's like the current marketing campaign at time of recording is it's this like a father and a daughter growing up together, and there's two adverts, one from the perspective of the father, and he's Googling how he can relate to her, and then another one, she's Googling things. And that really doesn't focus on like, hey, look what Google can do. Did you know how great this software is? It's just people using it, and this is why they're using it, to find out bits of information on the fly. And that's a very, very smart way to have done it, I think, which is why Google's still not it's still a popular company, and yet it's massive, right? And
exactly.
It's hard to maintain good public image and be massive. I think it's just like
that again, you see, like, it doesn't convince, it inspires. That is the main difference. Like, it's not marketing where you have some cool things you say and try to convince people. That's also the rational part, like the functional beliefs and stuff. It's about features and stuff, but that doesn't inspire. It inspires when the mission is very why driven, and that's actually, I think, what they do really, really great as well.
So walk us a little bit through that whole breakdown of the mission then, because I mean, obviously the emotional part must be the most important, but probably the hardest. It's quite intangible. I would say that, and this isn't very good startup examples, but I mean, maybe it's easier to do it on a bigger scale, like Amazon, for example. Like, people can't connect emotionally with Amazon, but they're so functional that everyone's like, yeah, I love using Amazon. So could you walk us a little bit through like the steps, how startups can reach their customers and audiences through those three elements that you mentioned: the emotionality, the emotional element, the rational element, the functional element, because they're obviously quite disparate, aren't they? They're not, they don't feel very tied together.
Yeah, sure. Like, first, I might start with the rational and the functional, like branding in general, because that's like what comes easy to people to know. Like, you know what you're doing, you know which features you have, and the problem just is when you just communicate that it will be easily exchangeable, because if you just communicate that, then there will be another company that does it better at one point. So it is so easily exchangeable. But as it connects like the neocortex, as the speech is also located there, people can easily communicate why they love a product, because the design is great, because it's so fast, because it's so intuitive. That's very easy. So that's why you also always have to have that in your mission as well. But in a later point, the crucial thing is the emotional branding. So getting a connection between the user and your company, your brand, or your product. This is because the emotional branding is basically the belief. So this is what people get inspired by, because, as I said, it is connected to the limbic system, so where our emotions lie. It is in the subconscious, so people won't find it easy telling why they love something. Like, it is not tangible or something. They just know when it feels right. So that's the most important thing, that you, as a founder or as a person, understand how to communicate the mission. And like the why part, the emotional part, is never about a product. It is about like changing something. It is about putting something in the head of the user that he really wants to like be. It's because it's always about the user, right? Like, you can't talk about the product. You always have to talk about like what the company does to change the status quo right now, like to get the person into a mental state that he really wants to be that. And then you need to communicate what the brand does to achieve that. So this would then be the how and the what. So you always have to, like, it is about like selling sweets, something that somebody really wants to have. Like, you first want to make a connection between something like that the user really wants to have that, and then tell how and what like they do it. So
why do we make sweets? And
yeah,
how do we make sweets? Yeah.
No, so this is so important too. First, in the why, like the why, there you need to communicate a status quo that needs to be changed, or something the person wants to be at one place. So imagine always having the user in that, like, don't talk about the product or something. Always think about the user in that step. And then later on with the what and the how, then you can tell, okay, all the things, the rational and functional things. So the person actually finds it easy to communicate why they love it. Because they can't tell that with the why. Like, that they really can't tell. They just know that they love it. And this is like, the why is always the one thing that drives behavior. So without telling the why, people find it very easy to connect with you, and then it's easily exchangeable, because they don't have loyalty then. They don't have a connection. They don't love it.
It's crazy hearing you talk about it, because like the whole time you're giving us examples of how this stuff works, there's just like companies flashing into my head of like, that's a company that I think in that way. That's a company that I really identify with. That's a company that hasn't got that right for me personally. CodeSphere. But for the positive ones, obviously.
Yeah, no, definitely.
But it's also like with CodeSphere is a really good example where like it's very difficult to explain to somebody like on a back of an elevator pitch, like, oh, it's this, and then for them to be like, oh my god, awesome. But that's, for me, I think that because I'm not so like connected with the company as Dan is, when I was doing the user testing that Dan was holding, and I was the tester, I was the testee. Yeah, interviewee. Yeah. I was just like, I felt the other end of the spectrum where I was like, I can't really tell you why. I just really like this. It just, like, that's something, again, it's like the opposite of what we were saying earlier, where there's like
that's the sign of a good interviewer, I think.
Yeah. Well, the interviewer, very bad. Product, great.
Yeah, like, this is intuition. Like this.
It's like, you obviously want to give like as honest feedback as you can, but then in reflection of the interview that we had, and with this in mind, I should have said, like, I don't really know what it is, but it's intangible, but I think this is a really good idea. Like, it feels good.
Yeah.
Which is like from what you're saying, that's like the kind of core and the most difficult part. So it's so interesting, and like being able to put yourself in that position. Yeah. It's a bit like what you were saying, Dan, as well, about these wanting to know like what those specific users. Sorry, this is outside of this conversation. You were telling me that, specific users who might say, for example, what films do they like, or what do they like doing?
Building personas, right? Yeah.
Yeah, building personas, because you then you kind of start getting more to grips with this stuff, and being able to quantify the emotional part of your product and your mission. It must be so hard, but then if you can, then it's like gold dust, isn't it?
Yeah.
Would you say then that that's the secret to getting customers to love your brand? It's just, it can't be just communicating this why, but that's definitely, you're saying, the key starting point.
As I said, it's the foundation. Like, this is because otherwise, as I said, it like the why connects with your decision-making part. It lays completely in the unconscious. That's why you can't tell it. But this is connected to driving behavior, and otherwise you won't have that connection. So this is why the secrets of having customers. Like, of course, you can have a mission that is not why related or like really purpose related, but then you will just have customers short term. Like, they will switch directly when they have a better product with better features. But you, like, what branding is and what you really want to have is that bond, that connection with people. And without the why, without communicating why, you won't have that. So this is the secret, the foundation of your branding, of your mission, and the whole foundation of your whole company, of your brand. Yeah.
So how then do you turn these people you've communicated the why to into brand advocates?
Yeah.
How do you make this step?
Okay, like that again, by inspiring them. Like you can't really convince them. It will come naturally if you communicate why you do it, like your purpose, your belief, because people will be inspired and people will be able to say, look, yeah, that's right, that's really cool, that's what I love. And if you then have also great product, like based on this, then people will love it. It needs to be intuitive. It needs to be something that comes easy to people. And then you have everything that you need. Like, it will come natural, very natural when you have that. Like, if you have something very inspiring and then a product which people will love, then actually you can't really do anything wrong.
Yeah.
Of course, you need to communicate it very well. But actually, that's a really good thing, because if people won't come naturally to you organically, then you know something is wrong. And then you know something, you need to improve, because then, like, at one part, something isn't really right at that point. So, yeah, it will come natural when you have an inspiring mission and a great product based on this.
Is it in a very Berlin example? I think it's very London, actually. Maybe it's just all cities.
Any startup hot pot.
Anywhere you can buy a delicious startup hot pot. No, I was going to use using that as a context. How you turn these people into brand advocates. I was thinking about this whole race to the bottom culture a little bit that startups have, and I think the most prevalent one in Berlin is, of course, this whole 10-minute delivery service thing.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because before I always just be like, I just don't like this stuff. And I couldn't tell you why. I just would say it's not for me. I think that intangibly so. But now I realize why I don't really buy into it is because all of these companies, they're all racing for a price point which is unachievable. They're flooding the market with all these different versions of the same thing. There's no why. It's just
no, and you know what they communicate? That they are faster than the other one. Like, this is what they communicate. They're totally on the what and how. They don't say why they do. Like, they don't communicate the why, and that's probably why you can't really identify with them. Like, of course, I'm also buying from them when I work the whole day on a project and I don't really want to go out and stuff like this. But that's not why I would love it, like why I would always do it. I still go shopping because, I don't really like those companies as well. But that's also because they don't sell something that I love.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting actually, because at the moment, I think Getir is a Turkish company. It's one of one of the options of a 10-minute food delivery stuff. Yeah. And so at the moment in Turkey, 2 companies have recently become unicorns of $1 billion valuations. And it's the first time in Turkish history where even one startup has become a unicorn, let alone 2 in the same year. But the 2 of them have taken a completely different approach, where one of them is obviously one of these fast delivery services, and we all kind of know that story. But one of them is also this Turkish-based Amazon-style company where it's way more about the why. I couldn't tell you the specifics because I'm not a Turkish person, but apparently they skew very specifically towards Turkish women. Yeah. And they've got a completely different style where they've gone specifically for a very Turkish market, and in market it works perfectly, but it doesn't have any appeal outside of that country, because of the style, and it's their whys.
Because the people are totally different. But if you target that segment, and that's why you also need to find out who the user is, then you can directly target that one and also speak the mission very good to them.
Cool. I'm glad we've put a close to the problem in my head of why I have a problem with these companies. That's good. Get a closure.
to close up on this topic though, but so before we have because a lot of companies, they'll even have funding before they have a very clear mission. Finding product market fit can be somewhere down the road, and sometimes for startups it moves very fast. You have an idea, you pitch it, you get funding, and then you're going. So how do you convince early adopters that your brand is for them, before we've said a few times in this talk that like communicating the why is important right away, but how else do you get early adopters to be like to see your vision before you've really got off the ground?
Sure. Like you first have the idea, right? But first, like as I said, first you don't have a product, you just have a mission as something to sell. So what you really want to think about is, okay, what do I want to change? Where do I want to bring value? And this is what early adopters will like. Like we can just base this on the why, how, and what model, because, if you don't know why you do something, why do you then work? Like, why do you then work for that? And people will easily know when something feels natural and true to you. Like, people will know if you really, also as a founder, work for a mission, because people like, that's also the thing with the profit. Like if you just build a company based on because you want to raise money quickly or something, then people will never buy your product, because then it's not about like helping, it's not about inspiring, it's not about changing the status quo to a better one. So this is always also with investors, like selling something to investors, you need to really find your mission and why you work for something, because this is the only thing you can sell, and actually always sell. Like you never sell products, or a good company never sells products, it just sells their mission, and then people will love to buy your products without you even having sold like products in the first place, but just the mission and the status quo they want to change. So yeah, early adopters need to know the mission behind everything. And this is like, I think, the crucial part to turn also like people into early adopters when they bond with also your like whole process. People will be interested in that then, and they don't need a perfectly designed product in the first place. They just need something they really can identify with and things they believe in. So yeah, I think this is the crucial part.
Yeah, that's some really awesome advice. All like good founders out there will be able to communicate their product immediately to people around them and get people excited, So I guess the next step there is just having the first early team members as well, really understanding and caring about your product. And then
I also think for an early phase startup, this stuff completely mirrors with team culture and recruitment as well. I think you'd only have a very small selection of people who would start working somewhere where they're like, oh my God, we're going to build this.
It's why so many startups find it so hard that so few succeed, because it's not just about one person having a great idea. Mm-hmm. It's not just about one person being able to communicate that idea well. It's about them also happening to find people around them who are willing to join that early phase, and then find investors who are in the same cycle as they are, and then hit the market at the right time. There's so many factors. And I think that like what you've described today is so many good tools people can at least have in mind how they attack it, and give yourself the widest possible chance of success.
Yeah, and also like there again with building a good company, like mission is not just important for the user or the customer in the end place. It is also so important for your employees, because when all stick together, then they will bond. They will all like fight and work for something, which is the mission. And then they have something in the mind where they all are connected to each other. And then you have a really, really great like company environment, because everyone knows why they do what they do. And then they find it so much easier. Of course, startups, they don't pay the best. Of course, they are like a young company that has a certain type of investment. But if people know why they work for something and believe in something, then they are okay with like so many things, because they have a connection. They love what they do. And this is the crucial part. Like they love what they do because it's emotionally connected. And this is the crucial thing. Like always build emotions around that.
Thank you so much for your time today, Clara. Where can our listeners find you if they want to hire your services?
Okay, like it is youngblood.design. There you will find my website and my products. There I will also have a free user interview guideline and some other freebies, and also like my products. this is not now, like in this very second where we record it live, but from next or the next week on, then I will relaunch my branding and stuff like that. And there you will also have the whole free things and guidelines and stuff like that.
So if anyone's listening to this after April 2022, it's probably there. All right, that's Clara Youngblood. If you reach out to her if you want. Thank you so much for your time. I personally have been very inspired.
Thank you for having me.